everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Retro Gamers Podcast, episode number 179. Larry here.
And Anthony here. You got the number right.
I did. I was worried because I've done this before. So we're back. And how you doing? How you holding up?
I'm doing okay. Quarantine is treating me well. And when I say treating me well, I mean I'm getting fat.
I'm already there. Quarantine, I'm slowly moving to different parts of the apartment. As you can see here, I'm at a different spot right now. I was kicked off my out of the pop vinyl room, because that's my new setup for my 9 to 5. And the original place where I normally podcast, I just got to reset up a couple more things.
Yeah.
So almost there. I'm in the middle of my apartment now. Actually, as you can see, there's some stuff behind me.
I see. And I haven't moved since we recorded last week.
Stuff doesn't move, I don't think.
No. I don't think I can physically move anymore.
So we figured, we're hop on as always. And this week we figured we talk about something I don't think we've ever really touched on, no pun intended, because this really, we talk about the gameplay, we talk about the love of these games, but we never really talked about the one crucial part of the game that is needed for these games.
Intelligence?
I'm talking about the AC adapters.
Oh, yeah. Well, without the plug, you have no power.
Power! Or you can do the, more importantly, though, we're going to talk about the controllers. It was fun. We actually, it was just announced recently, which we'll touch on in a little bit. Sony dropping and unveiling, I should say, the PlayStation 5 controller. And it doesn't look like a boomerang, which is good, as we all remember.
No. They kind of stuck to what's been working.
They kind of did, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But and then as we were talking, just thinking about to go back to all these different controllers. I mean, back to the Atari, which was just one joystick, one button.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I remember. Yeah, I mean, the first controller I ever had was was for the Atari 2600, because that was my first system, and I just remember, obviously the overall simplicity of the controller. You had the joystick and you had one button, and that was it.
Yeah.
Because at that point in time, the power button, the the reset button, like turning the game on, was actually on the console itself. Mm-hmm. You know how you can, I mean, with controllers, like starting with the NES on, you had a start and a select button on the controller, but back in Atari day, that didn't exist.
At least not on the controller. Like I said, it was on the. It
was on the actual
itself.
System.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. So and as time went on. Think about it. To go from that one joystick, one button, and Atari had the paddle as well, their first-party paddle controller, but one button, one joystick, to what we have today is just like almost to see how we, growing up, kids today, they unlock iPhones at age 2, where they're already getting, I have my Xbox One controller happen to be near me. I mean, all the buttons on here, what we've evolved to, and we actually went through the evolution.
Yeah, that's kind of the interesting thing about it. Like, for the most part, we haven't been around since the video game console inception, but we've been around long enough to see how all of these controllers have changed over time, and it just amazes me on how complicated they got, and yet at the same time how easy it was for us to pick up on the changes and adjust accordingly.
I think we were able to pick up because it was not drastic. Like, we went from one button to two buttons, 2 to 6.
And 2 to 3 or 4, and then 6. Yeah.
Well, no,
depending on what you got.
SNES. Yeah, exactly. And then like 6 to 20 at some point when you get to the GameCube. Kind of backed off a little bit. And Nintendo being the forefront of all this. But let's I guess maybe start with Nintendo, because their controllers are so drastically, like, they purposely change the input to affect the system, where it's just a completely different gameplay, which is great on Nintendo's part.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think of all of the controllers, I think Nintendo's the one that kind of forces you to readjust
Hmm.
every single console. I mean, when because when you talk about other systems, obviously your PlayStations, your Xboxes, and things like that, like those guys kind of stuck to what worked. You know what I mean? What worked
Yeah.
for them. Like there's but yeah, Nintendo, man. Like I mean, granted, the NES controller in and of itself was very simplistic. You had a D-pad or a crosshair. I still call it crosshair. That is another thing. Like, the way that you define things
Yeah.
on controllers, like I'll always call it a crosshair because it makes more sense to me than saying a directional pad or a
I'm
D-pad.
I'm definitely into D-pad. Yeah, I definitely do D-pad.
Yeah, but so you have the crosshair, and then you had the A and B button, which, if I'm not mistaken, were backwards.
Well, on the Nintendo was BA, yeah.
Yeah, on the Nintendo controller it was BA, which I always found interesting. I'm
Yeah, it
like,
was a
why
little
wasn't
weird.
it
Yeah.
AD? And then you had the select and start button again, select on the left, start on the right in the center there. Um, so that was like again, very simplistic, easy to follow because obviously, really, once you press the start button, you're only really using two buttons, right? The A
Hmm.
and the B buttons. And again, it's like it's probably the most memorable controller for me because
Yeah.
that's the controller where I played some of the most iconic games in the history of the industry, and that goes for a lot of people. It's like Super Mario Brothers, Legend of Zelda, Contra. I mean, you can just
Yeah.
rattle off dozens of games. And it all comes down to that the muscle memory you would have. I guarantee you, if you picked
Yes.
up if you picked up your NES controller now and tried playing these games, I don't think you'd have any issue whatsoever.
No, no, and it's proven fact. I got the NES controllers for the Switch, and when I use them to play on the online, the Switch online games, it's yeah, you're right. It's just there. It's already there. I mean, right off the bat, would you say that the NES controller is probably the most iconic?
For me, I would say so. I
Okay,
mean, I don't know if I don't know. I mean, it's all a judgment call on what you would consider the
and
most
that's
iconic. So
also probably generational. Now that I think
yeah, it's a
about it.
generational thing. I guarantee you, like, 90s kids will probably lean towards the PlayStation controller,
Hmm.
more so. And then when you get to your 2000s, well, you're talking either Xbox or PlayStation at that point, I
Yeah,
would think. Um,
probably.
yeah, but for me, like, yeah, if I were to say what is the most iconic one in my memory, it's the NES controller.
Okay. I would say me too. A lot of times, like when you go to Comic Con, like at New York Comic Con, when I see original artwork, a lot of times and probably because it's simple, it's a rectangle.
Hmm.
It's more an NES controller. Like I have that laser cut Contra controller.
Yes.
I can't imagine what that would look like as a PlayStation controller. It looked kind of bulky.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, yeah, Nintendo, started us off well with that two-button controller, and then Super Nintendo goes into not only throwing us into the deep water with more buttons, not only double like triple the more buttons,
Yep.
but ergonomically speaking, it was a bit of a more comfortable controller with the rounded edge and
Yeah.
everything on the Super Nintendo controller. But let me ask you this: do you remember what it was like when you first held a Super NES controller and you're like, "What are these shoulder? We take for granted shoulder buttons now. This was a brand
Yeah.
new concept with the Super Nintendo."
Oh yeah, I had no idea what those were. Obviously, when you play your first game on the Super Nintendo, which for most people was Super Mario World, you learned really quickly how to use those shoulder buttons because obviously it was important for the game to
Yep.
understand those.
Yep.
But again, like to your point, like the curviness of it, it kind of conformed to your hand better,
Oh yeah.
because your hands, like, I mean, when you think about the hard edges of an NES controller, the points on the edges would kind of stick into your palm a little bit,
Hmm.
whereas with the rounded edges, it kind of just formed around, your hands
It
formed
did. Yeah.
around it. So it was a little bit more comfortable. And the same thing can be said, obviously, since we're talking about 16-bit era, the Sega Genesis controller, which didn't have that full roundedness on the bottom. Like it kind of
It had.
had a little bit of a different shape to
Yeah.
it. You know what I mean?
It
It
did.
kind of had a wave bird
Yep.
kind of look.
Yep.
But the most important part of it was where you gripped it. And on those
Yes.
edges, it was a little bit rounder and a little bit longer it was longer than the Super Nintendo controller because I think it was compensating for more of your hand.
I can see that. I can definitely see that. And it was with the original. We'll jump over to Genesis with the original Genesis controller. You're right. It was. I always felt the original 3-button Genesis controller was just big, and I forgot that until I got the Genesis Mini, which
Mm-hmm.
came with the actual size original controllers. And when I opened up and I held that controller probably for the first time in a long time, I was like, wow, I forgot how big this controller was for a controller that only had 3 buttons,
Mm-hmm.
three A, B, and C. Um, and Genesis, they threw in that third button. I mean, the Master System was more traditional 2 buttons like the NES controller,
Mm-hmm.
but the Genesis to try and stand out um, had the 3 buttons controllers, but I guess you can say like in a weird twist of fate that kind of they had no choice to do it. The iconic 6-button controller came out of necessity almost for Genesis.
Yeah, and I think that's mostly because when Street Fighter and fighting games like started to get ported over, you needed the extra
Yep,
buttons. Um,
absolutely.
but what was interesting is that when they went to the 6-button controller, because to your point, the Genesis 3-button controller was really big,
Yeah, it
right?
was. It was.
And
Yeah.
when they switched over to the 6-button controller, which I actually still have hiding somewhere,
Mhm.
they actually shrunk the size of it and still managed to add 3 more buttons.
Exactly. The smaller and these hands, I need big controllers to hold it. Like on phones when they get smaller and smaller, I wasn't happy about that.
Mhm.
I need bulkiness. But yeah, with the 6-button controller, there was something about it when they shrunk it. It just designed itself a little bit better. It kind of came in onto itself, and then it just became just iconic because now you have 6 buttons like the Super NES, but
Mhm.
the 3 and 3 as opposed to 2 and 2 shoulder buttons, which definitely I think worked better. The 6-button Genesis controller I did prefer for fighting games as opposed to a Super Nintendo controller.
Yeah, but I think the drawback to the 6-button Genesis controller was the fact that you were and again and this was a testament to the way Nintendo did the shoulder buttons. You couldn't use your left hand to press any of the buttons. You could
This is
only
true.
use it for the
Very good
crosshair of
point.
the D-pad. Um, so that was one thing that I thought was very innovative on Nintendo's part. They were the ones that came out and gave you that ability to use your left hand to on the buttons.
Yeah.
Um, so it helped. I just think I think it helped like the ease of flow in terms of like using a controller.
No, I can see what you're talking about because if more your left finger
Yes,
with a Super Nintendo,
basically, your left
but
and
yeah,
index finger.
it can go quicker as opposed to just bouncing back and forth with the thumb. Good point
Anybody
on that. I
watching
never
this
thought
on
about that.
YouTube is probably going to come up with a lot of jokes based on our hand movements.
Probably, probably.
Yes.
And meanwhile, I'm staring at like a lot of these controllers that are just way out of my reach, unfortunately. So yeah, so Genesis. Well, let me ask you this then: between the Super NES and the Genesis overall, which controller would you prefer?
Um, I would definitely say the Super Nintendo because again, like I said, that left shoulder
Hmm.
button I think was pivotal in terms of again, there's an evolution to learning a controller, and I think Super Nintendo was again, they started that evolution by allowing you to use your left index finger
Yeah.
on a button, which then obviously became a lot more instrumental or useful in future controllers.
Yes. Very good point. And I like the Super Nintendo just again, comfortable, ease of use. Also, a lot of people may not I mean, a lot of people listening probably do, but those who don't realize between the Super Nintendo North American controller and the European controller, I want to say the European and Japanese controllers
Mhm.
were the same like this, but taking into consideration texture on the controller, the Super NES North American controller, the 4 buttons, BA and
XY.
YX,
Mhm.
XY, BA,
No,
BA, YX.
on the Super Nintendo, I thought did they both go backwards?
Yes, they did.
Okay.
So the YX buttons were concaved, where the BA buttons were contoured. Am I doing that
Convex.
right? Convex.
Yes.
All right. So in other words, the you explained it.
So basically, the XY buttons had a little, like, they indented slightly.
Yes.
So you felt the difference between
Yes.
the regular AB buttons, which had a little bit of a like an upward bump in a way.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't remember if the Japanese one did this. I know definitely the European controller did it. All four buttons had that bump to it. So, without looking at the controller, you knew what you were pressing for North America. And I've tried the imported Super Nintendo controller, and I got to admit, in the beginning, it throws you off just a tad.
Mm-hmm.
It does.
Yeah, it does. Weird. But then you get used to it, and again, what it becomes muscle memory. In other words, like because your thumb was essentially controlling all four of those buttons, so it had an idea on where it was based on what you felt when you pressed the button.
Exactly. So I thought that was pretty interesting too for Nintendo to do that, that sensitivity, if you will, early sensitivity.
Yeah.
All right, so Nintendo and Genesis at this point, we got these iconic controllers, but then there's going to be another controller that really is standing the test of time by this newcomer who's entering the field. Sony breaks out the PlayStation, and they're changing the game completely with their original controller. Yes.
Although I will say that I think at the time, and if we wanted to bring in other parties here, the Sony PlayStation controller was definitely different. But I think step back one and maybe look at the way the Atari Jaguar came out with their controller, because their controller kind of started that almost I don't even know how to describe the controller itself. Well, yes, it was ugly. It was definitely ugly. But what I mean is, like, you actually were able to grip both sides of the controller because.
I see what you're talking about. Here again, with the Xbox controller, you have the.
Yeah, exactly. Right, so, like, Atari Jaguar's controller kind of came out with that aspect first, but then Sony PlayStation, of course, in their development, they debuted this controller where it was a lot smaller. It was more compact, but it gave you a sense where, like, your like, I don't know if it was just the ring and pinky or like your lower three fingers were able to kind of grip around the bottom of the controller, just like that on the PlayStation 4. Yeah, Sony has definitely been very consistent with their controller development, because what they found in 95, what they developed in 95 worked so well, there wasn't really a need to change it all that much. And then on top of that, they also introduced 2 more buttons. So now you had 8 buttons that you were working, because you had two on the left shoulder, 2 on the right shoulder, and then you had the 4, at least to start with, when the PlayStation first came out.
Yeah, when it first came out, it was just that. It was, you had the L1 and L2, R1 and R2 now. So now you had these 2 additional buttons. But not only that, so now we're used to letters. We're used to BA, ABC, XYZ, all this stuff. And Sony, and there's different reasons for it. I think the main reason was more universal.
I thought they assumed gamers couldn't read.
Probably that too. Yes. But the Sony controller, the PlayStation controller, replaces those ABXY buttons with picture symbols, that are now so iconic. Again, I'm using the PS4 controller, and I'm just holding it up to the screen here. So we all know what this is all about.
Yep. So we got the triangle, the circle, the square, and I don't care if they call it the cross. I still call it the X.
Yeah, I call it X as well. Yeah. And of course, there were specific reasons for this. Do you know these specific reasons?
I know I'm
going to get one of these wrong, so Lord knows we're going to get called out on it.
You can get them wrong because I'm not. It's not coming to me.
So, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Nope, go.
Okay, so the easier ones was circle and X, basically yes or no, right or wrong or whatever like that. So, circle yes, X no. The
triangle and square,
I think, was meant to pull up maps, so shaped like a map.
Okay.
And the triangle, I want to say, had something to do with like first person or like your perspective or something like that.
Okay.
So, I mean, as if we, all have technology to be able to look this up as we're talking. But that was off the top of my head. I know. I want to say those 3 are correct. I'm pretty sure I'm off on the triangle, which I'm now going to force myself to look up.
Okay, well, you look that up.
Yes.
But meanwhile, just talking about the Sony PlayStation controller, I just remember when I first got the system, how how strange the controller felt when I first held it, and then realized not too long into it, just how much easier it was to play a game with it. You know what I mean? Like
It
I
was,
don't,
yes.
yeah, I don't know necessarily. Like it almost felt like it cradles into your hands in a way, into your grip.
Mhm.
Um, and it also with the way, if you look at the shape of it, you know how like the bottom part, it kind of curves. Like the grips on the bottom, it curves slightly in like this. Like yeah, you see how it curves like that?
A
It
little
also
bit.
kind of yeah, it
Well, it
made
did
it
it more.
yeah, it curved enough that it made it easier to press the buttons with your
Yes.
thumbs.
And it made it. I'm sorry, I was looking it up. So if you said it, I apologize. It just it took away a lot of the tiredness that your hands would get if you're playing for a long period of time,
Hmm.
ergonomically speaking. Um, Real quick, just to jump in, the designer of the original PlayStation controller, Teyu Goto, explains what the symbols mean. Circle and cross represents yes and no. Okay. Or confirm and cancel.
Hmm.
The square represents a sheet of paper to be used to access menus, so a
Okay.
map. And the triangle symbolize a point of view, probably meaning more like, I guess, like for first person games, you hit the button and either it centers you or does something to change the aspect.
Okay. Well, that makes
Tells you,
sense.
yeah. Also, real quick, this I did not realize, and it kind of makes sense. It sounds funny. The North American model of the PlayStation controller is roughly 10% larger than the Japanese model to account for the fact that the average person in the region has significantly larger hands than the average Japanese person. I did not realize that.
I did not realize that either.
So there you go.
So we have larger hands. Good to know.
Well, that I kind of knew, but I didn't realize the controller themselves were shaped a
Yeah.
little different. So, so yeah, so these iconic four buttons, and not only that, ask me if this threw you off because the original PlayStation controller. So you have actually, I'll show you here. Well, here I'll do this. I like having these controllers. They're all the newer models. I apologize, but we're using them on
Hmm.
the YouTube video to actually show and take advantage of video. So the directional pad, very traditional directional pad. This is the Switch.
Yep.
It's basically one piece. It's one piece of plastic. The PlayStation
Yep.
actually made them four buttons, which even
Yes.
to this day. Did you ever find that weird? I always found that odd.
No, and I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why I didn't find it weird because I think because we were getting so used to buttons
Hmm.
as opposed to just like pressing it didn't make sense to me to have the crosshair
Hmm.
or D-pad all together. But also remember this. Um, it wasn't too long before PlayStation introduced the joysticks
Yes, that's next.
to the
Yep.
controllers. Um, so the crosshair has become, at least up until today now it's more of like a quick action button. So
It
in other words,
is.
like you press up and you do, you like for example, when I'm playing um, uh, Resident Evil or something like that, it's like you can press something and switch a weapon really fast,
Hmm.
or you press it and you pull out a grenade or something like that. That's really what the D-pad has become.
It's been regulated to a sub menu.
Yeah, it's a sub menu quick access buttons basically. So I don't mind it being that way because now in essence it's really just they're just four buttons.
Hmm. I hear what you're talking about. Definitely, there are every once in a while you'll come across a game like a classic arcade game or something like that, or even newer game. Super Mario Maker 2 is one I find this where on the Switch, yeah, you can use the because we're going to talk about the analog next. You can
Yeah.
use the analog to move around, but I just always default to the D-pad. Even in a game like that, I'm always defaulting to the
Hmm.
D-pad or like a shoot 'em up where
Yeah.
the analog is more traditional to a joystick, arcade joystick, but I'm always going to the D-pad. I think that's just out of like you said, kind of muscle memory or
Yeah.
comfort level
Well,
thing.
see, and different from you, I moved over to the analog because, again, talking about the PlayStation, the PlayStation One was if I'm not mistaken, they were the first ones to really introduce not the single analog, but the double.
Yes. And so we get into that. So now, so you got to imagine on the original PlayStation controller, for those watching on YouTube, these were not there. Also,
Yeah,
this was all gray.
the two analog. Yeah.
Yeah, the analog sticks, the analog were not there. Something, again, we take for granted nowadays because I always, with the I got to jump ahead just for a moment to these newer models. I compare newer controllers for the newer systems today, like I do the iPhone. So I think I mentioned this a couple weeks ago. Back in the day, cell phones, there were so many different versions, sizes,
Hmm.
shapes, colors, folded, not folded. Then the iPhone comes out, and the iPhone starts to become iconic. And now all cell phones today are basically shaped like an iPhone. They have that general shapeness to it. You don't really like if every phone was off. For the most part, they look the same.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, this is a PlayStation controller. This is the Xbox controller, and now this is the Switch controller. Each one of them have two analog sticks. Each one of them have the D-pads, have the four
Yep.
buttons, and six shoulder buttons. So, other than just the overall shape and chubbiness of the controllers,
Yep.
you know, they're basically the same.
They're all generally the same now.
So, at some
Um,
point, like it got to a point where like, you know what? Other than actual design,
mhm.
it's standard. It's status quo.
Well, again, because it's comfortability. It
Yeah.
really is. It's like, they've determined what is the most comfortable design and shape for a controller. So every company has basically just kind of moved
No,
in
no,
that
no.
direction.
I meant more just the two analogs now. The deep like
Oh,
no
I thought you
one's
were
so
talking about
far.
well, I think the two analogs and the overall shape of the
Yeah.
controller. I mean, you might as well just throw that in there.
I mean, it kind of is short of the Xbox being a little more clunkier. Um, but we'll get to that one here in a
Yeah.
minute. Yeah, as far as who was first with the analog, even though the PlayStation did debut the two analog, again, almost out of necessity,
Yep.
almost. I think at that era, the best designed controller, though a lot of people say otherwise, is the N64.
The N64 is definitely the weirdest controller. I'll
It
give it that.
definitely was odd when it came out.
Hmm.
The N64 just has those three peaks on it. Um, but in reality, they were designed properly. You had your two on the side, so you grip it for a traditional game. But then you had the one in the middle, which totally made sense for a game like GoldenEye, because it
Yeah.
felt like. All right, so do you want to explain kind of the N64 controller as far as with the analog and the Z button and everything like that?
Yeah, so I think what the N64 controller was trying to do was it was trying to placate gamers of the NES and the Super Nintendo as they transitioned over to this new system because they gave you the option. In a lot of games, you had the option of using the analog controller in the center,
Mm-hmm.
or you could use the D-pad
Mm-hmm.
for the same purpose. The D-pad didn't really on the N64, at least to my memory. I don't remember playing a lot of games where the D-pad did anything different from the analog stick.
I don't think so. I don't
Yeah,
think
so
so.
basically it was really just a choice you got to make. If you felt more comfortable playing the current game you were on the D-pad, you use the D-pad. If you wanted to use the analog stick in the center, you can use it because let's face it, you didn't have three hands, so you couldn't hold
No.
all three,
Yeah.
points. So you had to choose, your left hand basically had to choose between the D-pad and the analog stick. Now, and then of course behind the analog stick underneath was a Z button that you can press with your left finger,
Which was a
which
game changer in my opinion.
was definitely a game changer. And I also think, and correct me if I'm wrong, the Z button mimicked what the L button did because depending on where you were on the controller with your left hand, if you were holding the analog with the Z button, you really couldn't reach the L button.
Um, I'm not 100% sure on that. I'm not saying that's
I'm
not
not
wrong.
100% sure on that. I thought that was the case because if you really needed to use the L button, you kind of had to like really twist your hand a little bit in order to get to it while using the analog controller. So it was a bit complicated.
Hmm. Um, maybe again, I'm not 100 because really, like the Z button to me, that whole controller was designed for first person.
Hmm.
Because GoldenEye was just that controller was perfect for GoldenEye because you hold the middle of the controller and you have the analog stick, so you're moving around, and you have the Z button underneath. So now it almost feels like you're, holding a gun and you're shooting the way you shoot as you would in GoldenEye. So it gave you that reaction. And then really, it kind of just made the left side of the controller obsolete at that point.
Yeah,
in my opinion.
Yeah, certain games did. I'm just trying to remember, like, I don't have an N64 controller in front of me, but or maybe I do. Hold on one second. I think I may have like a version of one for my PC that I bought. But I think that because this one almost warrants, like, you kind of have to like really like look at it. Oh, and I do have it right here. So here we go. Sorry for all the noise. But again, when you have an N64 controller with the shape that it's in, I'm trying to remember. Like, see, if I'm using the analog,
center that a little bit.
Oh, sorry.
There you go.
If I'm using the analog, my left finger is stuck underneath on that Z button. I cannot get to the L button and control this.
No, agreed.
There's no way.
That's why I don't think it was just. I just don't think you use the L button. That was it.
Well, and that's what I mean. But I think in those instances, in games where you're really relying on the analog, perfect example, you said GoldenEye. For me, it would be more Star Fox 64.
Okay.
So the Z button basically would be whatever the L button would be if you were using the crosshair.
Fair enough.
D-pad. That's at least and then, of course, since I have the controller out, might as well. We also talk about they added they have a 6-button system here. You had A and B, and then you had this really weird thing that they did, and to me, this is where, like, it didn't make any sense to me.
Okay.
Instead of doing like A, B, X, Y, whatever, they decided we're going to do A and B, and then we're going to break the C button into 4 buttons.
It's basically
up, left, down, and right C.
Not to rehash an old system, but the Virtual Boy. Now, actually, this is something to mention. The Virtual Boy controller, which I have over there, was very weird because it had 2 D-pads on it. One on the left side, one on the right side. Full D-pads. So the N64, that C button, if you will, is kind of a second D-pad. Now, granted, it was majority of the time it was used for camera angles. I don't really remember. Oh, well, Legend of Zelda was perfect for.
Well, Zelda used to access certain items.
Exactly. But actually, if you can bring that controller back up one more time, man, because what was also unique about that controller is the memory card. Now you have this access right near you for the memory card.
Yeah, and that was definitely useful. Although it was useful in one sense. In another sense, I don't think it was absolutely necessary because your memory card usually, like on the PlayStation, it was in the system, it was in the console, and that was basically all you really needed. I don't think you needed to really carry it around on your joystick, so I didn't necessarily think that was
I think the idea was no. If you think about it, though, the PlayStation only had 2 memory card slots, which is fine. But on the N64 was the first system to have 4 controller ports, which meant if you had customizable, like the wrestling games that we played, the WWE and the WCW games, if we had customizable characters or whatever, each one of us could have brought a memory card. We usually played at your house.
Yeah, that's very true.
So that's, I think, where that comes in. But so memory card aside, though, there was an adapter that also was huge on the N64 that kind of, again, may have been a game changer. Dare I say, if I'm corrected, please mention it, the Rumble Pack may have been one of the first, if not the first, force feedback that we got before PlayStation made it standard in their DualShocks.
It's possible. I don't remember which came out first because I remember that the Rumble Pack. Did the Rumble Pack come with Star Fox?
I want to say yes because the memory upgrade came with Donkey Kong.
Yeah,
and so I think the Rumble.
And for that reason alone, also is something to also bring up where I felt like the slot was a little bit of a detriment because if you were a solo player, there's only one slot. You either have your memory card in it or your Rumble Pack. You would have to swap it out after you load your game to get access to the Rumble Pack, unless you hooked up another controller.
But it would tell you there was a prompt that would come up. Wow, I do not remember this. The Rumble Pack actually required batteries. I could have sworn it did not.
Yes, it did.
Wow, I don't remember that at all. All right.
AAA, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, they were AAA. Yeah.
Yeah, AAA batteries.
So
That actually reminds me. I should probably go check my Rumble pack because if it's got AAA batteries in it
ooh,
after all these years, it may be
ah,
there may be an ugly sight in there.
there may be some caramel on that.
Absolutely. Hi, Lori. She doesn't watch this. She doesn't listen to the show.
Not at all.
But moving on. So we have this really weird hybrid controller for N64 that let's face it, it did wind up working.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? It worked for what it was. I still think that the PlayStation controller was more comfortable. And then obviously we've talked about it when Sony added the two analogs, it became a completely different experience because now all of a sudden you've got a left analog stick that replaces the D-pad. Or gives you, at least in the beginning, gave you the option. You can use the D-pad if you're comfortable with it, or you can use the analog joystick, similar to the N64. But then you get this right analog, which then started to basically do what the C buttons did on the N64 controller.
Yes.
That allowed you to control the camera angles. And on top of that, then we started to get extra buttons in those D-pad, in those analogs.
You did. If you press down, that's L3 and R3, which is standard on today's controllers. So let's real quick, because I don't want to get caught up in time or anything. PlayStation. So Nintendo, we've already talked about 3 systems on Nintendo, and the controllers are drastically different. But PlayStation, I mean, even to today with the PS4, even a little bit with the PS5, they're sticking to what brought them to the dance. They never made, short of like the touchpad on the PS4 and the light bar and stuff, they basically never changed the PS4.
No.
I mean, the PlayStation controller.
No, they never changed the PlayStation controller because, to be perfectly honest with you, not only did it work, but it also allowed all of your gamers to just very easily pick up your next system and roll right into games because you don't have to relearn a controller, like the feeling of the controller in your hand.
Not only that, but for the backwards capability, made sense.
Yeah, exactly. And to be honest with you, like Microsoft kind of did the same thing. If we could touch on it really briefly.
Yeah, that's what I want to talk about next. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, well, not to skip over really. Step back a little bit. Sega Saturn wound up doing essentially the same controller that the Genesis had. It was a 6-button.
It was until they
started as a 6-button D-pad controller. It was very
analog one.
It was a little strange. And then before we get to Xbox, I have to bring up that brick of a Dreamcast controller on Sega's last system.
Oh.
Now, the Dreamcast to me is the most underrated console of all time.
Agreed.
The system was powerful. The games that were released on it were absolutely solid. I definitely look back on my Dreamcast very, very fondly. But that controller was a bear. It was just a bear.
It was. First of all, the one thing that stands out at all times is so back in the day when we had wired controllers, the wire always came out the top. Yep. But for some reason on the Dreamcast, well, I know why. We all know why.
Yes.
It stuck out the bottom, which was weird. It wasn't intrusive, but it was weird. I can't do that.
Well, so, it stuck out the bottom, and then there was a little like nook in the top that you can push it into.
So if you want to almost, that's just as a very cheap example.
Yeah,
that's what it looked like. But yeah, and you were able to hook it up like this.
You were able to hook it. Yeah, you were able to hook it, and obviously the reason why they did that is because they had a slot on the top of the controller to insert the Sega Dreamcast VMU.
They had 2 slots.
Oh, that's right. There were 2 slots.
There were 2 slots.
Memory card and VMU, which were both like the back slot. You just put you could put a regular memory card in. Am I not mistaken?
You can do both. You can put another VMU if you wanted to.
Yeah, and then you had a VMU, which was basically a second screen, a mini screen on your.
Anyone?
Yeah, it was super tiny on your controller because you were able to take some of the games with you.
Did that? It actually acted as a second screen for some games.
Yep. Because it had a little D-pad and buttons on it.
It did. It very tiny. It was very cute. But with the 2, yeah, you're right. You could put 2 memory cards. They did sell traditional memory cards, rumble packs, some other items. But yeah, that was always interesting. You're right, Ant. That was definitely a large. But I wouldn't say it was the most of the popular systems like the Jaguar. That was a little weird, but I always thought the original Xbox controller, what they call the Duke,
Yes.
that bulky. I mean, it was just a chubby controller, and the buttons were spaced out a little bit further. I don't have an original Xbox controller. I only got all, and I have the system, which is weird. But you know how Xbox. I mean, they've only gone through 3 iterations of their controller, but actually, funny note, Hyperkin, you can actually buy. They've kind of brought back the Duke for the Xbox One X. So if you want to go back to that giant controller, you can. But I wasn't crazy about the original Xbox controller, not from day one.
No, neither was I. But I do also remember how many games I enjoyed playing on the Xbox. So the original Xbox. So it was one of those things where it's like I kind of forgave it. Same thing with the Dreamcast. Like the Dreamcast, like I felt the same way too, where it was just like every time I put the controller in my hand, it felt weird. It just felt weird. Did I still play games on it? Absolutely. Resident Evil Code Veronica on the Dreamcast to me was amazing, and far better than it was on the Sony PlayStation in terms of graphics. Yeah, but those are definitely the two where it's like they were trying to leap into the next generation, and for some odd reason, the next generation to them were these big, giant, bulky controllers.
Yeah, it was very bulky. Introduced the black and white buttons, which were interesting.
Yeah,
they were innovative.
Yeah, they were for the time, but then obviously they kind of just became obsolete because we went along with the standard, the way the controllers look today.
It did, yeah. In fact, when it went to the 360, they shrunk the controller down a little bit. They took away the black and white buttons and they replaced it with kind of a select start button, kind of, sort of. And then, of course, the Xbox One controller is where we're at today, with the, comfortness. Actually, I think they nailed it with the Xbox One. Of the 3 Xbox controllers, I think they nailed it with the Xbox
One. And I think they nailed it well enough that Nintendo kind of took a cue from them on the Switch Pro controller and made it basically the same way.
It kind of Switch Pro kind of looks like this. This is the Switch, Wii U, excuse me. And then this control, which I actually of the modern systems, this is my favorite controller.
Yeah, there's something about it that it's just it's super comfortable, and I think it's because they removed a little bit of the fat in the middle there, in between the two.
What I'm trying to do
grips. So that definitely works. But going back in reverse, good. Microsoft adjusted along the way and finally kind of hit where everybody else was. Sony basically stayed the same all the way throughout because they realized, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And then Nintendo, of course. We didn't touch on a few of their other ones, like the GameCube controller, which kind of took what they had with the N64, but they removed that third grip kind of thing.
It was like a dare that was done in R&D, saying how many buttons can we put on one controller?
Yeah, and Nintendo wins. They stuck every button imaginable on that GameCube controller to the point where it was absolutely insane. And pretty much only worked if you had Super Smash Brothers. Literally, you got the most use out of that controller for Super Smash Brothers. It's a perfect game, perfect controller for Super Smash Brothers. Not necessarily for every other game they made.
Very true. To the point where you can even buy it today for the Switch for Ultimate, Super Smash Ultimate.
And then, of course, I don't know if it's because they received a ton of flack for the GameCube controller or not, but then they just basically said, screw you, here's the Wii.
Yes. All my controllers are black.
Yeah.
I used to have
it's basically screw you. Here's the Wii controller. It fits in one hand. It's motion censored. Go F yourself. Basically, it's like you're not getting a two-handed thing. And if you want a two-handed thing, here's the analog joystick that you have to hook up to the Wii, and then you got to kind of do this.
Oh, the nunchuck. It was called the nunchuck. I have it in a drawer. Yeah. Yeah. You know what? Here's the thing, though, with the Wii. Yes, the idea of the Wii was simplicity because the whole idea was motion. It was all about getting up and moving and playing, so that's why, to me, though simple but effective, especially when the Virtual Console came out, because if you wanted to play some games, all you had to do, there you go. Right? Do I have the right direction?
Nope.
So,
no? Incorrect.
All right.
Not the way I'm looking at you.
Oh, okay. On one of these directions. And then it turned in, and it was the first time in a actually first time since the Nintendo that you had a feel of an original controller. And even some straight up Wii games use this, like Super Paper Mario, which is one of the best games on the Wii. You play in this position, sideways. So, and even had the B button on the back. So, I for the most part, as much as it gets flack, I like the controller. Also, built-in speaker.
Yes.
So
no. They did do a lot with it, and it was definitely innovative for the time. For me personally, I wasn't ready to move forward with the motion gaming with my hand, because I remember saying it very clearly. I was like, I love you, Nintendo, but I don't want to stand in my living room swinging my arms wildly to play a game.
Meanwhile, Beat Saber.
Shush. I said I wasn't ready yet. Okay. And it took me about 10 years.
And then the Wii U comes out with this gamepad.
Yep.
So now it's a second screen, which touch screen, which again, innovative. Really, you only saw that on the GameCube. To the Switch, to only when you use it in handheld mode. Yeah. But I like the joypad, and funny enough, though I live alone, I mostly played Wii U games on the joypad. You were able to gamepad, excuse me. Gamepad. You were able to play the entire game. You can keep the TV off. The idea of the Wii U, I think, was for families where people can play the Wii U but not really take up the television if they needed to.
Right.
That's what I liked about that gamepad on the Wii U.
Right. Well, and with that, and from the Wii U, we got the Switch. Let's face it. Literally, they took the Wii U and said, now we're just going to make it completely portable. Because the problem with the Wii U was you could play it on the gamepad, but you couldn't take it with you because it was still tied to the console.
Because we were still, there was still a definitive difference, even though the Wii U shrunk that gap a little bit for the idea of the Switch. There was a definitive difference between console and handheld. And, you had the Wii U and you had the 3DS. Those two were out at the same time. So those were two completely separate ideas. So, you know what I mean? And then the Switch completely changed all that, to your point. Yeah. But
well, they didn't necessarily completely change it. They basically took the Wii U idea and just enhanced it. That's really all it was.
No, I meant for the portability.
Oh yeah, but that's what I mean. It's like I don't think they changed anything. They really didn't. If you look at the Wii U and you look at the Switch,
there's
very little difference.
Yeah, there's a meme that came out originally where it's just someone took a picture of the gamepad and just sliced off the controllers. There's your Wii U. Exactly. What was also cool about the gamepad is when you played multiplayer games on the Wii U, because the Wii U used Wii controllers as well.
Yep.
It was a lot easier where you could have one person off to the side with the gamepad and the other three people playing on the television, and it really made it more fun to play multiplayer games at that point, because you didn't have to worry about everyone looking at one screen. You could have that one person off to the side, you know what I mean, kind of sneaking around doing their own thing. Perfect example was nope, that was on the GameCube. But actually, they brought it back on the Switch. Pac-Man Versus, where one person would have the controller and then the other three look at the screen. So,
yeah.
But yeah, innovative, absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. And then that brings us to today, where now we've gotten the recent announcement, switching off of Nintendo, of the brand new Sony PlayStation 5 controller.
Yes. So the PlayStation 5 Dual Sense, it's called, not Dual. For the longest time, everything was called Dual Shock 2, Dual Shock 3, 4, but now it's Dual Sense. We're going to get into that in a moment. First of all, the design of it. So here's the PlayStation 4 controller right now for those on YouTube, and those listening, you'll know what a PS4 controller looks like. The PS5 controller looks a bit sexier, people. I got to say, a lot more curvaceous. Definitely. Everything looks almost like just one sheet. It's very, very curvy, which I like. For the first time, though, they're going to release. They showed a white color. Usually, it's a black color controller. This is the first time, I think, probably since the original PlayStation, they're releasing a variant color at launch for a controller, which is pretty cool. But to get into the stats now, there's no real processing unit and this, that, and the other thing. But here's the biggest thing. So they still have the buttons as is. They've replaced from the PS4. They don't have a share button anymore, which was cool. Let's real quick on the PS4 for streaming and to share screenshots or video captures. You hit one button, pops right up. You do what you got to do. They changed that a little bit, but the idea is in the controller. But what I want to mention is, first of all, I think there's multiple microphones on this controller, which is almost may do away with headsets to a point, which is very interesting. I like that idea. The biggest feel to it, though, no pun intended, is this new haptic feedback. So I don't know how they work in Android phones, in Samsung phones, but haptic feedback, like on an Apple Watch, which I have, I own an Apple Watch, and the haptic feedback is very weird. Ant, does any of your cell phones, or do you have like a smartwatch that does this feature?
I do not have a smartwatch.
Okay, so basically, what it is, it taps your wrist for an Apple Watch, for example, but it does it in a way that it almost feels like different. It can feel like different things, like. If I'm for example, if I'm driving and I have navigation on, like I'm using Apple Maps, right? When I'm driving, it will do a haptic feedback that I know if it does it in one way, it means turn left. If it does it another way, it means turn right. It feels completely different. Very weird. That's what they're going to feature into this new PlayStation 5 controller. So if you're playing a driving game and you hit the mud, you will feel the sluggishness of the mud as you're driving through. Also, which this I'm very interested in, adaptive triggers. So PlayStation 3, I think, started it, where the buttons were actually sensitive. So if you push down slowly, something will happen slowly on the system. It's not just an instant reaction. Right. With the PlayStation 5, there's going to be force feedback. They use the example of drawing a bow. So as you press the button, you feel the tension in the button as you pull back the bow in the game. I can't wait to feel what that's like. Yeah. And long story short, it's basically bringing feel. They want the sense of feel into video games now. We have virtual reality. Now it's about time to get that sensation in your hands.
Yes. And it's definitely innovative. And it's going to be something, again, as gamers, we're going to adapt to, provided that it's successful. We don't know exactly how we're going to react to something like that. So I'm also curious to see if this is going to be the norm or if there's going to be an option to where you can turn it off. Because let's say, for example, it doesn't work for me. Like I'm not very happy with the feedback, the haptic feedback. Can I just turn it off and play the game like I normally would?
That would almost be like the 3DS. You can completely turn off the 3D on 3DS.
That's what I mean. Like I would like to assume that they're going to give you the option depending on the game you're playing, obviously.
But let me ask you this, if I may. No disrespect or anything, but if they're presenting these, wouldn't you want that? Like the whole idea of these new systems, better graphics, to get almost more reality to it. Wouldn't you want to, if this is what they're giving you and you choose to buy the system, wouldn't you want to play that to try and take advantage of it, or at least learn it?
Yes. No. Okay. That's not what I'm saying.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
What I'm saying is, if I don't like it, in other words, perfect example. When the Wii first came out, we just talked about it. I didn't like the idea of doing the motion controls, so I skipped the system. It took them a while before they released a regular controller for the Wii so you can play games with a regular controller in your hand. As a result of that, I wound up skipping the system because I really wasn't ready to go that route. With this, what I'm saying is, if I try it and I'm not comfortable with it and I don't like it, I would like the option to turn it off. That's what I mean. But again, it's also something that, for all intents and purposes, I'm expecting to like it anyway. Yeah. I'm just saying on the off chance that it's like, oh, you know what? Let's say there's a specific game where I'm like, it doesn't feel comfortable playing it, using it in this game. Can I turn it off?
All right, I can see that, but also you run into like you did with the Wii, you run into missing out on some amazing games, which could happen with that as well. But that's a whole nother topic, whole nother
Well, yeah,
subject,
that's something
another
completely
time.
different.
Yeah,
But controller-wise, let me tell you, I mean, the PlayStation 5 controller looks fantastic to me.
it looks
I
great.
also like the fact it's a simple cosmetic adjustment, but now instead of the light being in the front of the controller where you don't see it, it actually
Yes.
curves around the sides.
Yes, so you kind of get it. If you look here on the PS4 controller, it'll just be on the sides of the touchpad as opposed to being up here.
I
The
think
only
it's
time
also
I see
I think it's also on the sides of the controller.
no, like on the hand grips.
I
No, I
thought
don't
I
think
thought
it
it
does
was.
that. No,
Oh, okay.
just on the sides here, probably up on top as well, so other
Yeah, so
players
it actually
can
gives
see.
you, yeah, it gives you like the light you can actually see as opposed to like because when I'm playing, I never see that.
No, neither. The only time I've ever seen this light change color is when I play Wheel of Fortune,
Nice.
whether you're red, yellow, or blue.
Yes.
So this is straight from the PlayStation blog, just to give some information here. Where'd it go? All right, so quote. The designers were then able to draw the lines of how the exterior of the controller would look and feel, with a challenge of making the controller feel smaller than it really looks. In the end, we, being PlayStation, changed the angle of the hand triggers and also made some subtle updates to the grip. We also took thoughtful considerations into ways to maintain a strong battery life. That's always been an issue with these wireless
Very
controllers
important.
now.
Mhm.
And lessen the weight of the controller as much as possible. Also, fatigue.
Yes.
DualSense also adds a built-in microphone, as we mentioned, enables players to easily chat with friends without a headset. But of course, if you're planning to chat for long periods, they say a headset. And then the colors, traditionally our base colors have been a single color. As you can see, we went in a different direction this time around, again, quoting the website. And decided on that's what they meant, a two-toned design. So it's the white, kind of like this part is the white where the buttons are,
Mhm.
and then the inside where the analog is black.
Yeah.
So they're doing it like that, which I like. That's pretty cool.
Bringing back the black and white.
Yep. All right. So basically, that's about it. Again, it's more the look of it. Of course, you can check it out, PlayStation blog.us.playstation.com. And with that, I mean, we really dived into this with controllers a lot more than I thought we were going to.
Yeah. More importantly, we dove into it.
Yeah, that triple Lindy'd right into it.
Yes, we did.
Well,
I mean, again, it's a topic we've never covered before, and it was actually really interesting to hear how both of our reactions were to controllers from from onset to today.
So let me ask you this then: going from the earliest to the absolute latest, what is your bottom line favorite controller?
Oh, that's not fair. There are reasons behind this because I would say if I had to pick one based on the overall like comfortability, ease of use, and just sheer muscle memory without any issue, I would actually have to go with the PlayStation controller because it has spanned 4 systems.
Okay.
Where do you go?
I have to say, again, overall, whether it's a racing game, a first-person shooter, a 3D adventure, even classic games, I'm going to go with N64.
Okay.
As much as it looked so weird and looked like you can kill somebody with it,
yes.
Again, that analog, that middle part right there was absolutely perfect for driving.
Yep.
And perfect example for that. So again, GoldenEye, you use it the middle. It was absolutely perfect. But at the same time, when you would play the wrestling games, WCW NWO World Tour, Revenge, WWE No Mercy, WrestleMania 2000, it used the D-pad to move the characters. You really didn't use the analog was used for taunts, or I forgot which game it was where it made you kick out each and every time.
Oh yeah. Oh, that was so.
And what was great about that was you can so slyly, Ann can show it better than I can, use the D-pad if you had to, just quickly flick with your thumb, quickly flick the analog. So absolutely overall, I'm saying N64.
Okay, that's fair.
So, and in fact, again, I'm going to go back. We're not being paid by them. They just happen to put out really cool hookups and everything. Hyperkin has put out or is putting out an adapter for the Switch where you can use your original N64 controllers on the Switch, which I think, in a way that Nintendo put out GameCube controllers to play Smash Brothers Ultimate.
Yep.
I think a game like Mario Kart 8 Deluxe can take massive advantage of the N64 controller, because using that controller on Super Mario Kart 64 was, I remember, being very easy and very convenient.
Yeah, just don't use it on Mario Party.
No, or at least make sure you have a set of controllers on standby as you break each one.
And put a hole in your hand.
Absolutely. So let us know. Hit us up. Let us know your favorite controller of all time. Let us know some of the and we're talking the first party ones. What are some of the weird looking ones? Again, as much as the Virtual Boy gets garbage, it was very weird and I think innovative a little bit to have the dual D-pads. But then you have the Jaguar, which was just a mess.
Yeah, I'd like to call it something else. It was a dual D something for sure.
Oh, terrible. So hit us up on Instagram, on Facebook at Retro Gamers Podcast, on Twitter at Retro Gamers Pod. If you want to email us, please email us directly. Where can they email us?
You can email us at email@theretrogamers.com.
Definitely, we want to hear from you. We want to incorporate you guys, you gals. We want to hear from everything. And with that, continue to be safe, continue to be well. Oh, real quick before we leave, we are at a tie. We have to talk about the updated 2020 Video Game Challenge.
Oh, yeah, really quickly. So the last couple of weeks have definitely been monumental for me because for a very long time I was behind in the contest. Actually, I would probably say the last 2 or 3 weeks, because within the last few weeks, I managed to cap off Castlevania Rondo of Blood for the first time with 2 of the character endings. I did not unlock the other 2 characters.
Fair enough.
And then
there were 2 characters.
Yeah, there are 4 characters in the game.
Right.
And then last week, I completed Shadow of the Colossus, the remastered version on PlayStation 4, which was amazing.
Yes.
Absolutely beautiful game and very challenging for what it was. And then just this past weekend, I put the kibosh on Grim Fandango, the remastered version on the PlayStation 4, which was a game I never had on the PC when it first came out back in '98.
Awesome.
Really fun game. If you like those types of mystery point and click adventures, I will say I had forgotten how games back then had you kind of just randomly figure things out. Like literally there were some things where it's like there was no direction as to what you needed to do.
Yeah.
You just needed to wander around and kind of randomly try things to make them happen. And that's the only way that I managed to get through that game. It was a bit of a slog in certain places, but really cool story, great characters. Again, visually, the remaster was, visually stunning. And that ties us up, Larry. Now we got 5 games apiece that we've completed.
So we are back at naught for all intents and purposes. I was on trying to beat Operation C. I just can't, it's a short game, but gosh darn, it is tough. It's on Game Boy. You would think it's pretty easy. I've never beaten it. I finally, though, for the first time ever, I got to the final boss. So that, I feel, is an accomplishment unto itself.
Okay, so you're there. You're right there then.
I'm trying to, but there's no save feature, so I got to keep starting from the beginning. And I'm not going to lie. I'm going to be 100% honest. When you were playing Rondo of Blood, and you would play, stop the stream, and then play again, I'm like, because I kind of forgot it was PC Engine. I'm like, I could have sworn this was a password game. How the heck is he starting so far ahead in the game? Because we're not doing save. We're not doing save states.
Yeah.
There's an original save feature.
Yes, but the problem with I'll be honest with you, I never played the PC Engine one.
No, I know, but it wasn't.
If it was password related, they didn't transfer that over to.
No, because it was none.
Yeah.
You were good. You were good. I was just like, wait a minute. I had to check for myself.
I had to look at it. There had to have been a save state of some kind for the PC Engine because there were alternate routes you could take in the game.
When I say save state, meaning these newer games nowadays, you just literally stop it right in the middle of the game and then just pick up. Where a save feature is just, all right, you die, you want to save your progress, you start from a checkpoint.
Well, I think you would have to go back and check to see what the PC Engine did.
No, there was no. It was just like Symphony of the Night was. You know, you just save your game and you just keep moving on. There was no password feature.
Oh, okay. Then
you're good.
I'm fine.
You're good.
Yeah, okay,
you're perfectly fine. I'm just like, wait a minute. I'll admit, I did have to check. So yes, I basically accuse you of cheating.
Yeah, I would accuse you of cheating, but since your games have been, the monumental completions of Where's Waldo and The Little Mermaid, I really can't accuse you of anything because
Little Mermaid and Tailspin gave me some trouble. I'm going to be honest with you. Okay.
Okay.
Quantity over quality.
That's okay. I'll take the quality.
I'm taking quantity. If it makes me win, I'm taking quantity.
Well, no. See, here's the thing. I'm going to do both, quality and quantity.
Well, it depends. So we'll see.
Yeah.
And with that, we'll just hang up on each other, folks. We will catch you right here next week on the Retro Gamers Podcast.